Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Pod and the Pendulum, the horror movie podcast covering all the franchises, one movie in one episode at a time. As always, I'm your host, Mike Snoonian, and joining me in the co-host chair today from Halloweenies, The Losers Club, Girls on the Boys, and her writing appears over at Bloody Disgusting, as well as many other outlets, Miss Rachel Reeves. Rachel, how are we?
Hello. Hi, it's Rachel Ratma Reeves here, and so excited to talk about this one because, yeah, I let you guys have, viral. Like, you can have that one, I guess.
Oh, thanks, Rachel.
You're welcome.
That's kind of you.
But yeah, very excited to talk about this one because this is the first time I've revisited it in a little bit, and yeah, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. This one has some really fun things. So can't wait to get into it. Yeah.
It absolutely slaps. So what are we here to talk about tonight, Rachel? You want to kick things off for us?
Oh yeah, that. Today we are here to talk about the fourth installment in the VHS franchise, which is VHS 94.
Yeah. So this is like the reboot of the series. Like, it's kind of like after the first trilogy, this series went away for a while, and all of a sudden it came back, like kind of unexpectedly, right?
I think so. I didn't necessarily expect it to, but I remember like the first time I saw it, which was relatively like around when it first came out, I was like, okay, thank you. Like, it did feel like, I don't know, they thought about it, they made some choices, and they came back better. And so I really appreciate that they took a step back and were like, what is this? What do we want this to be? Is it actually worth coming back? And maybe listen to some criticisms and maybe, actually made some really smart changes that I'm sure we'll get into because, yeah, it came back with a vengeance and really, I think, I don't know about you, but got me re-energized to actually pay attention to this franchise.
Yeah. I was going to say, like, it came back and tapped into what people liked about the first two movies, but I think that this exceeds them in a lot of ways. Like, the critiques that we had about, like, when you were on for the first episode and we talked about, like, some of the critiques that we had where it felt like rewatching it for the show, where it felt like super bro centric, and like a lot of it was just based around like sexual assault. Like, that's where we're getting our scares from. That goes away to a large degree with this one. You don't really need to have that here. And they really improved on it. And I kind of wanted to ask, like, as we get our initial thoughts here, like, what do you think of like the way going forward these movies are titled, where you start like having your typical part one, part two, so forth and so on, but it's more named after a year. Like, what do you think of that as a conceit?
I think it's really interesting. I'm interested to see how it moves into the future because, especially if they're sticking to the VHS kind of model, it's like, well, we've only got so many years to work with. So,
yeah.
At a certain point, it's not really going to work. Doesn't mean they can't do a VHS 05 or something, but that'll have to be a bridge that they cross. But it's kind of nice having a point of reference and thinking about that time period, because then it does, I don't know, brings up different things for different people and where people were at during those periods. So I kind of like it, and I think that they do a pretty good job at making some references to those specific years that don't feel super obvious or super heavy. We'll get to 85 at some point. Maybe that one a little bit more than others, but this one and 99, I think, feel, subtly nostalgic, if that's a thing.
I think they feel like period in terms of like what they evoke in terms of like the look and the mood and the feel.
Yeah.
And then they kind of reference some real world, like one short in particular, like references like some real world comings and goings that had gone on that remind you of the period, but it's not like people are walking around in like MC Hammer pants
Yeah.
or do it, things like that. Or you don't have someone like wearing a Sub Pop Records t-shirt,
Mm-hmm.
going like, "Oh my God, Kurt died." It's not something like that is
True.
going on for this. Um, but I'm wondering, like, when you think of like 94 in the title, is there anything in particular that year evokes for you or like kind of makes you think of?
Yeah, well, I was trying to kind of think about that as I was watching it this time around, because, and if I had to think of 1994, I wouldn't necessarily think about the internet. But then when I was watching this, I was like, oh yeah, that was kind of the era of the internet. And me personally, I was 9 years old in 94. And yeah, I remember like that was about the time. Like my family, we probably got internet in like 95 because I was
Hmm.
in or about to go into like middle school, so maybe it was 96, but that like period of time when like, oh yeah, the internet, that's a thing and you
Yeah.
can like have it at your house and like what does that mean and what's possible?
Yep.
And so I do think that they did a really good job about tapping into that part of what 1994 meant. And then some of the looks too that felt like they felt very 94 to me, some of the
Hmm.
outfit choices and things. So
Yeah.
yeah, thinking about where I was at and like what my mom was wearing, I was like, oh yeah, I remember some of that stuff.
Yeah, I would have been like late teens by then, so not quite 20, just starting out, like my second year, actually not just starting out, but like second year at college. And that would have been like we wouldn't have had internet access in like our dorm rooms at that point or the
Yeah.
university apartments, but going to the computer lab and like finding like websites and being like, "Oh my God, like this is crazy." Like I never envisioned anything like this and like spending like a ton of time in like the computer labs just like going through like a ton of different websites. So to kind of see that kind of like name checked here and like the first segment was like that was pretty interesting.
And cell phones, like you didn't like my dad, I knew he was an early adopter of the cell phone, but it was like the brick cell phone, like the huge cell phone.
Yes.
And so that's, obviously for a lot of horror movies, that's always an obstacle that you have to overcome. And I think that they handled it really well because I don't think, I mean, cell phones were around, but they were not to the level, obviously, of now or even a decade ago. Like there was a lot more niche that people had cell phones
Hmm.
all the time.
Yeah, they were either the brick or they had like this super long antenna. Like they remember like you could like whip somebody with those antennas and they didn't necessarily work in a lot of places. Like you had to be in you weren't going to get them to work in the woods for sure. Like they weren't going to work on the compound of something like the Terror for sure. Like they were only like select places. Like they weren't really meant to replace the home phone at this point. It was just like really when you think of like mobile phone, like they're thinking of like your car phone, like when you're
Hmm.
driving around. And that's really it. Um, and then this is the first one that like you see the partnership of like Shudder, like this becomes the new home for these movies. And like, do you feel like that's a good fit? Like it's probably one of the larger acquisitions for Shudder in terms of like a get for them for an original movie. Um, how do you feel about Shudder in terms of not just being like a repository for a lot of great older titles, but trying to promote like newer horror as well? I feel like they've been a little bit hit or miss with some things.
They have. I think this is a perfect home. Like, I think Shudder is a perfect home for the VH franchise because I don't necessarily, I don't regularly hear people talking about VHS outside of
Hmm.
the the quote unquote horror community. I just try to think about people I interact with at work or like if my family's asking about something, none of them have ever mentioned the VHS franchise. So I think
Hmm.
Shudder is the perfect home for something like that. It's also something that plays well over streaming services. their original films are really hit or miss. Some of them are great. Some of them I've been totally surprised by, and some of them it's like, eh. But I appreciate them giving things a shot, bringing things to their platform that I've never seen, filmmakers I've never seen or heard of, and so I'm all for that. I do think when I can't remember exactly when this happened, but there was some shuffling around of ownership and shuffling around of staff. I feel like that kind of changed things a little bit. But I like seeing a service that is so dedicated to the franchise and is seemingly cares to elevate and amplify some voices that people might not otherwise hear from. So I'm never gonna hate on that for sure.
Yeah, I do like that like recently some of their titles have gotten theatrical releases. And I know that Terrifier 2 wasn't like a Shudder film. But it seems like the success of that movie kicked open doors for a lot of smaller indie titles where it's like, and also with like theaters just in general struggling to make a buck. They're like, hey, why not put some of these movies on like one screen for a week or two and just see how it does. So you're seeing films like Late Night with the Devil, Immaculate, which I know Immaculate's not a Shudder movie, but I think It's a Wonderful Knife, which is another Shudder movie, get these like releases for a few weeks, which gives them a little bit more prestige. Because let's face it, like it's always going to feel more prestigious when your movie comes out in a theater versus like just gets released on streaming. But what I kind of wish they had, you have Joe Bob Briggs, where he does like a big production for a lot of the catalog titles. I wish there was something like that for Shudder Originals, where when they're premiering something like Where Evil Lurks, that you had like, where's like your Matt Pinfield of like 120 minutes? Like speaking of like 94, where is someone like that who would come out and just talk about some of these newer titles that they have premiering, and then maybe bring in some of the creators and some of the talent on board and create some, if not like a red carpet experience, like some sort of excitement around some of these titles. And I don't know if it's just like a money issue or a time issue, but I think that would be like a cooler way to go rather than just like dumping it onto the service and saying like, here you go, like another Shudder exclusive.
Yeah, that would be super cool. Yeah, it wouldn't have to be much, but even if it was just like a weekly update or something, just like even if it was under 15 minutes, 10 minutes, just have somebody on, just like a quick little thing, or just being like, hey, here's what's happening on Shudder this week. That would be really smart, because sometimes you're clicking around and it's just like, I don't know. And especially with Shudder, where it can be really hit or miss. It's like, do I want to invest an hour and a half in this movie? Because sometimes there's been some times where I do, and then I'm like, that was not worth it.
That was not worth my time or energy, and you get to a point where you're like, I'm already midway through it. I'm going to like just soldier on to the end of it. Like, for Everywhere Evil Lurks, there's like 3 titles where you're like, this, you're just filling out, you're trying to get to a number to say we have X amount of titles in the service.
I will say what I love about Shudder is that they do seem, at least at this moment and in the past, are dedicated to physical media. That a lot of their original titles come out on Blu-ray and DVD. And I think that's super cool, because there's not a lot of streaming services that do that. Netflix is not doing that. Hulu doesn't really. I think Hulu does it sometimes, but it's pretty rare, I think. But it seems like Shudder is actually putting out a lot of their titles on Blu-ray, and I love that, because I as much as I watch a ton of stuff on streaming, obviously, but if I really like something, I want to own it and I want those special features, and Shudder does that, and that's cool.
Yeah. And also with streaming, like it's unless you're I mean, even like an HBO Max feels precarious, depending on who's running it and what is going on. Like, you know, what's going on over there. Like, even like a big boy like that can feel precarious. Like, unless you're Amazon or Netflix, everything feels like so ephemeral. Like, it could just go away tomorrow. And what would happen to like all these movies that Netflix has produced, including, you know, for every, you know, red notice that's out there, which is like, actually, it's funny. We had this conversation this evening. Like, my brother and I were talking. He's like, you know, Netflix saw these like movies that he's like, they don't really, he's not a big like movie guy. He's like, they don't really feel like movies. He's like, he's like, I can't really describe it, but they doesn't feel like a real movie to me. But for every like 5 of those, there's like a Martin Scorsese, The Irishman, that
Mm-hmm.
comes out, or there's something by like Fincher that's on there. Like, what were to happen if like Shudder were to go away? Where would all these titles go? So it's nice to
Yeah.
be able to pick them up on some sort of like format.
Yeah, for sure. And I encourage people to do that because if we've learned nothing, it's like that could very well happen. And it probably will at some point. And then AMC will be like, yeah, we'll take the catalog, but those originals, we don't really care.
We don't need them. We don't care about those so
Yeah.
much. So let's talk a little bit about the background of this one. Just have a few notes here, just because it's was the reboot of the series here, and there was a couple things of note. It was announced in June of 2020, which put it like firmly in the time of COVID, like the before days. And the idea was to reboot the series. It was a joint project with Bloody Disgusting and Brad Miska, joining along with the guys from Radio Silence and Shudder. Like, that was the partnership right from the get-go. Along with David Bruckner, like, Miska's getting a story by credit this time around. And David Bruckner was on, but this time he had done like The Night House. I think that had come out in, was it 2019 or 2021? I can't remember if that was pre or post COVID.
That's a
I know it
good
was
question.
before
That whole time,
Hellraiser.
it says the internet says 2021, August 20th,
Okay, so
2021.
post COVID. But that would have probably already been in the can by then. Like, The Night House would have already been finished by then. Because like Bruckner writes the script to this movie as opposed to having all the directors write their own material or co-write it with someone. So I kind of wanted to ask, like, does that make this entry feel a little bit more coherent overall, a little bit less slapdash?
Oh, 100%. It's kind of what I like about this is like they're all very different in the stories they're telling, but they're all creature features. Like these are
Mm-hmm.
all different kinds of creatures and I don't know, playing on these ideas of just like advancement or like advanced creatures or I don't know, just kind of entering this new era of time it feels like. And so I love that we get all these different creatures but very different. And obviously how these creatures come to be is very different. And so I think it's super cool and that's what kind of
Yeah.
connects them all even though the stories are totally different. They're all united by that common thread.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And especially with Viral, everything felt so disjointed and so disconnected. I think we talked about like when Ari and I did that. There was even one short that they just cut from the movie completely because it number one, it wasn't found footage. It was like a very weird kind of like surreal short film, like no dialogue. Like, I described it as like an extended Victoria's Secret commercial with some horror elements to it. Like, that's really how it felt. So it wasn't found footage, and then it didn't really fit the theme of all the other shorts. Like, that felt like super disjointed. So this, I think, having one person kind of write everything and then have the directors kind of shape it from there felt really like the right way to go. Bruckner was going to direct a segment, but he dropped out. Actually, the thing that Bruckner doesn't write is the wraparound, like that. And we'll
Mm-hmm.
talk about that. But the other segments, he has a hand in writing. Um, He's originally going to direct a segment, but he pulls out because he's preparing the Hellraiser reboot. Radio Silence, who are on board as producers, like they were going to direct a segment, but then they start working on the first of their two Scream installments, so they can't direct. They were going to come back after, both Bruckner and Radio Silence had worked on VHS1. You can go back and listen to our thoughts on their efforts there. And aside from Timo Tiojahanto's short, which was shot in his homeland of Indonesia, like the rest of them are all filmed in Toronto, and they're all filmed with one crew, which kind of needed to do because of COVID and having a limited amount of people you could work with. So it's another departure from the series' first three entries, where everybody had their own crew on their own time, and they're just sending it in. And they built all the sets at a hotel in Toronto, like all the internal sets. Obviously, they were in sewers for part of it, so that was not part of the hotel. Makes its debut at Fantastic Fest in the fall of 2021. Debuts on Shudder a month later, and at the time, it was Shudder's largest title to debut. Like, it set their record for most amount of streams when it came out, and that was broken a year later with VHS 99.
Dang.
Yeah. And critics and fans seem to like this one. Like, it's like a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's a near 7% on IMDb. And yeah, I would say, like, if not just a return to form, but to me, to this point, maybe the best one in the series, like the most coherent and most satisfying one overall.
Yeah, to this point, like I think this is my favorite because with the others, there's something like icky. And I think, Devon was talking about this too. Like there's that sleaze in some of the others. And, it just doesn't sit well, doesn't age well. But this one, I mean, is it perfect? No. But I don't have any complaints like that, where it's like, that is like borderline offensive. So and it's really well executed, I think, a little bit better than the other ones. It feels like there's more of an overarching vision behind it, which helps so much.
And I'm someone that like enjoys a good amount of sleaze. Like, I am okay with like movies like the original Maniac. I'm okay with like a good amount of like exploitation films from the 70s and 80s. Like, I typically like sleeve, but there is just something about, I don't know if like in the first couple movies, it's that the filmmakers didn't necessarily feel like they were being sleazy. It just was sleazy. And you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like, it's like, that's
totally.
not their intention. It just comes off as that. Um,
Yeah.
if someone were to say like, I'm sorry if my words if you're offended by my words type of thing, as opposed to I'm sorry if my words offended you type of thing. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh no, totally. I understand that. And yeah, I will watch garbage all day long, and I understand different time, different standards, and I'm not going to necessarily hold that against it, but it just felt like, yes, this is how you should
Mhm.
do it if you're going to move forward with this, like leave that in the past. And then, I mean, finally also we get some ladies involved.
Yes.
And I think that really helps. And we really see that. And I love that about this one. I'm like, oh, this one's for the girlies. Like, there is some very interesting things happening with the women
Mhm.
in this particular installation of the franchise. And I really like it. I really love it. So I'm very
Yeah.
excited to talk about some of these filmmakers that were involved.
Well, let's start at the top. Let's start with Holy Hell, which are the wraparound segments that are written and directed by Jennifer Reeder. And initially, Simon Barrett and David Bruckner were going to write the wraparound segments. I think they'd even scripted something. And then Reeder presented them with her plans, and they liked it so much. They're like, you know what? Run with it. So where do you want to start with Jennifer Reeder?
She is a fascinating filmmaker. Like, whenever I watch her films, I'm always surprised. And she has such a strong visual aesthetic and like just makes some really interesting choices that I'm like, oh, okay, that's what this is. So I never know what to expect from her, and I kind of love that. Like I feel like she's really doing things that feel very authentic to her that I don't necessarily see another filmmaker doing exactly the way she is, and that's great. So I really like that, and I think we do see that here. Yeah, I'm not 100% sold on where the wraparound lands.
Hmm.
Like, there's some ideas about it that I like. I think just how it's executed at the end feels a little clunky to me.
That's what I
Yeah,
thought too.
yeah, okay. I was like, am I off there? But it feels a little, and maybe it's even just the performances feel a little weak.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I when you get to the very end, it's like you get the quote unquote big reveal, and I'm like, okay, that's a little bit silly. But everything before that, like you said, the visual aesthetic, like it starts really strong. Like to me, overall, I think this is the strongest of the four wraparounds that we've had so far. Um, Partly because you could either see it as its own thing, like as its own standalone story, completely separate from the other three movies that we've seen before, or you can view it as a natural progression of like, okay, well, we've had like these two other houses that are filled with these like killer videotapes that are filled with like snuff films and murder, and people are getting killed off watching them. Even and then you have like the ice cream truck in Viral, which is a good idea, just not done super well. So like
Hmm.
this naturally leads to that progression of like, well, now we think we know who's behind it, and then you have this airport hangar come church come like cult compound that looks creepy and like really cool. Like you're right, like she does have like this great visual eye.
Yeah, she has a great visual eye, and she's always features really strong female characters, which I should have seen coming. I now it's like, oh yeah, looking back, of course, why did I not immediately think these women, knowing who made it, were going to be the villains at the end? I should have totally known that. I just like it looks great, and what I think I appreciate about it the most is that it doesn't waste any time. Like it just jumps right in, and then it jumps to the first segment. Like it doesn't have 20 minutes of setup where I feel like some of the others it takes a while before we even get to
Mhm.
the first segment. And this one, I it was like 6 minutes, and we're in, and I loved that because it's the
Yeah.
wraparound. I don't need it to be super excessive getting into it. I just want to get to the first segment.
Yeah.
And I love that they did that and didn't waste any time getting there. And also, yeah, every time we, took a beat and went to the wraparound, showed us something interesting, visually interesting. I thought the way the camera was operated felt very visceral and made you jump into it and immediately let us know we're back in the wraparound. So it's very effective in that way. But yeah, the end of it kind of falls a little flat
Yeah.
for me. There's a lot of things I like
Mhm.
about it. Like, hell yeah, we're the final girls. Like, oh yeah, girl power, but also super kind of cheesy. I'm a little disappointed
Little
where
bit.
it comes
It's a
around
little
to.
bit
Yeah.
cheesy at the end of it. Like, this is our final tape, and these are our final kills. Like, okay,
Yeah.
okay. I think this was her first real foray into genre too, because like she had done a lot of short films before this. Like she had kind of become a little bit known, like the underground film scene, for like a series of short films she did in the 90s and a character she portrayed called like White Trash Girl, which you can find them on Vimeo. Um, Aesthetically, like they look very similar to what she does here in terms of like they look like they're shot on video. The color palette looks like pretty similar. Um, they're really well done. They're super indie and they're super uncomfortable to watch. They're not horror, but there's something like very uncomfortable about them. And she does like a number of short films in the early 2000s and the early part of the second decade, which are like very queer. They feature a lot of marginalized characters, and they're not necessarily genre or horror. So it feels like this is one of the first thing she really does that dips into genre territory, and then she kind of continues on that track going forward. Like, well, she did Knives and Skin, I guess, like just before this, which is like a more of a thriller, I would say, than a horror movie, but still really good. Um, and then she does Night's End and then Perpetrator. And I think both of those are like Shudder films as well, like things that she continues to like work with Shudder, or like they continue to work with her.
Yeah, it does feel like she plays with genre a lot, and it could, depending on how you want to brand it, it could be thriller or it could be horror, very dark themes and dark ideas that feel very, it's interesting. She's got this like surreal quality to everything she does, where parts of it feel very real, but then there's also something that's like, well, this is like a different reality. It's hard to describe, but it does feel like she's making things, but it's almost like a different timeline kind of thing. If that makes any sense. But yeah, she plays with a lot of very dark subject matter, which I think is why it tends to lean, and it feels welcome in the horror world. But I can also see people who aren't into horror enjoying these things as well.
Yeah. And then there's like the eye for visuals, where she takes things that I think we've seen in like the other VHS installments, especially in the wraparounds. Like, people that have been watching these videos always seem to look like kind of husks. Like their eyes are always seem like burned out. And she takes that like into another level here, where people are like literally like ripping their eyes out of their sockets at this point, because what they're seeing on these videos are too extreme. And I love that idea too, because like as a kid, like a few years before this, but like I could see like being like a teenager or being like a kid, when you would like find or go to your video store and you would just try to find like the nastiest, scariest videotape, and something that was like too scary to watch, something that was going to make you want to hide or look away from the screen. Like for me, I remember the first time watching, it was Freddy's Revenge, like A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, and literally watching like the second half of that movie, hiding behind my friend's like sofa and just peering out every now and again. Like that kind of idea that like what you're seeing is so fucked up that you just want to like rip your eyes out.
That's so funny. I remember like what I was renting that I was like, ooh, this is bad. Like this is gonna be so bad. I was like, Cruel Intentions.
Oh
and
yeah.
and disturbing behavior. Like, ooh, these
Hmm.
are like teenager films.
Hmm.
You know what else I like about all these segments in the wraparound, and I think it actually makes me like it more, is thinking about all of these things as urban legends too. And if you think about
Yeah.
this as like a story that you would hear somebody talking about, I think everything hits just a little bit better, including the wraparound, because this
Hmm.
does feel like a story. Like if you imagine some kid telling this story to their friend, suddenly all that silliness at the end and how they're selling it feels better to me, if that makes any sense, because it feels like a story like a teenager would be telling another kid
Hmm.
versus trying to think of it as, oh, is this a real thing that's happening? Like, no, this is just an urban legend that's being relayed to somebody
Yeah.
else.
No, that totally makes sense. And I think I kind of made that note in like one of them, I think like the Simon Barrett short that we'll talk about. Like that's when it hit like, oh, this feels like that very thing. Like, the idea of like there's a demon that lives in the sewers.
Yeah.
The guy that gets out of his there's the guy that gets out of his coffin and starts lumbering around. There's the mad scientist that's creating like these cyborg creatures, and then whatever the fuck is going on in that last short with the exploding vampire blood, it all does kind of make sense, where it's like things you would tell around the campfire or things you would whisper, at the lunch table at school to one another. So, and that is one of the things about VHS, is there always has been this kind of like little kid at the candy store feel to it, in that you're giving, and I think that's what this particular entry does so well, is it's giving these filmmakers, it wouldn't necessarily make this kind of movie as a feature. It wouldn't be something that they would make on their own, left to their own devices, but it gives them a chance of playing a much different sandbox and get a little bit weird. And that's when VHS is at its best, when it's like, we know what you can do typically, now take that and just get a little bit weird with it. And then when they accept that assignment and they're able to kind of like really lean into it, you get some pretty fantastic results.
Yeah, agreed.
So do we want to talk a little bit about the first narrative short here? Should we move forward, or anything more to say on Holy Hell?
No, let's do it. Let's get down there into the sewers.
All right. So let's talk about Storm Drain from Chloe Okano. And like you had said, like this segment and Holy Hell are the first two segments in 4 films that are directed by women. Why do you think that is kind of like so important and like kind of such a boost to the series?
Yeah, I mean, a much needed thing, because I think that there was just some stuff going on in the previous films that, yeah, I'm not necessarily sure a woman would have made those choices. And so, I mean, I think they, just handle things a little bit different. It's a different world for women. They're going to see things in different ways. And I think that we see that here. And it's about time. Like, come on. 4 films, and especially that's something that Shudder likes to do, is just have and highlight diverse voices. So, practice what you preach, people. Like, there's more filmmakers out there, and anthologies are the perfect playground to give up and coming filmmakers a chance and give them a shot and give them, an opportunity. So it's honestly just really depressing that it took this long, but I'm glad we got here, and moving forward, we'll continue to see some diverse voices in this series. So it wasn't a one and done thing. So I thank you for that.
You don't have anything like we do in VHS 2, where there's like Adam Wingard writing himself into, like, within 30 seconds of meeting like a very beautiful woman, like she disrobes him, mounts him, and he's like, I want the videotape of that. Like, there's nothing. Yeah, it's like, not a great look, dude. Not the best. A little bit silly.
There's not really much sexualization at all for anybody in this whole film, but here's the thing, you don't need it. Like, that doesn't like, it's not a requirement to be in this movie or any, and like I'm not prude, that's not what I'm getting at, but I just appreciate that we're able to look past that and write some stuff that is still effective and doesn't necessarily have to revolve around I don't know, that kind of low-hanging fruit, I guess, let's say.
Well, you had also just said there too, is like giving new voices and new filmmakers like the opportunity to work on material, and that is something like for Akano, like she'd continue to work with Shudder, because like about a year after this she does Watcher with Micah Monroe.
Oh, it's so good. I love Watcher. Super creepy, very unsettling, and does really like play up kind of the woman's perspective and what that character is going through. So if anybody hasn't seen Watcher, and if you're a fan of thrillers at all, I would definitely recommend it. It's very good. She's very well executed. Micah Monroe, of course, is a horror goddess, so you can't go wrong there either.
I feel like I'm the only person that hasn't seen Longlegs at this point. Like, I know it doesn't come out. Okay. So,
you're not alone.
And I'm here where I am staying in the UK right now. Like, it's not playing anywhere near us when it comes out this week. So I'm going to have to like wait another week and avoid. I've been able to avoid spoilers and most of the marketing. So I'm hoping that it meets the hype is what I'm saying.
Yes, I'm going in. I'm optimistic, but also I'm realistic, and I'm just gonna walk in with that, and we'll see how where I land and see how we leave. But yeah, don't spoil anything.
Yeah. But this is the Ratma short, and I feel like even for people that like don't necessarily like love this movie, they're like, yeah, but Ratma was pretty awesome, right?
Oh,
So
I
what do we
agree. When this came out, Ratma was everywhere. And I
yeah.
think that there's like something from almost every VHS, that really like people just kind of agree like that was the thing that everybody connected to. And I think it was just kind of surprising for at least for me. I did not expect that from this segment. And so it was just a perfect sort of, I guess twist isn't the right word, but what you think you're going to get. So I loved it and just how ridiculous it was and how disgusting it was. Yeah, Ratma is an icon.
Yeah, because it's like not only do you get like a 6 foot tall bipedal anthropomorphic rat, which looks like, and I think you'll appreciate this as someone doing the Alien series on Halloweenies right now. It looks like basically a xenomorph rat. I mean, when you see that thing's head, not only do you get that, which is horrifying enough, but it's like spitting out black acid at people that it's like burning their skin off. You're like, oh, I didn't know that rats had acid breath, but okay, I guess we're adding that to the mix too. Like, I guess that's a thing.
Oh yeah, it's disgusting, it's creepy, but it's also funny. And yeah, I mean, I love a news crew too, and I love
Hmm.
how they keep asking this woman, how can you help? What are you going to do to help? It's just it just is addressing some big ideas in a very humorous way, and it just
Hmm.
completely goes like a weird
Yeah.
other direction that I am all in for. I'm all
Yeah.
in.
Well, too, like, I think this is where the gap in between like viral and this movie is a good thing because you have like a good like 7, 8 years between movies where found footage had gone in some different directions. Like it wasn't just your typical here's a kid with a camera and they're running around in the woods and then at the end of the movie like something spooky happens and the camera falls to the ground and that's it. Like when you see this one, like WNUF had already come out, like the WNUF like Halloween special had come out, and I think you see shades of that in here to the degree that you even have like, and I think this is done by Steven Kostansky of Astron 6, like the directing team that did like Father's Day and most noticeably like Psycho Gorman. He does like
Yes.
the vegetable masher. Like you even have that little thing added in, and it comes out of nowhere, and it comes like just at like the most horrific moment in the short film, and then you're like, let's cut to like some dude who's talking about harnessing the power of like vegetables with what looks like a food processor, essentially.
Oh yeah, it definitely feels like they're embracing the humor more than ever before, but not forgetting about the horror. Like there are some moments coming up that are shocking almost that it just keeps going and it's incredible. But they don't forget that like the humor they're not forgetting that these are supposed to be fun. And I think this is the first film where they kind of finally realize that like, oh, like yeah, we can have it can be scary, but like doesn't mean doesn't have to be a bummer. Like we
Hmm.
can have fun with this, and we get that in Ratman. We get that with that little veggie masher segment. Like that is,
Yeah,
I was just watching that like, what is like? Why do you want to mash up your brain? It doesn't even look like it's working very effectively.
it does not. And like the deadpan delivery too, like the guys, he looks like completely like the soul has been sucked out of his body when he's like delivering. It's great. And I just the way this whole segment is shot is, to me, it really embodies like the spirit of like those local news teams of like the 90s, like where when your local newscaster was kind of like local
Celebrity.
celebrity.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
100%.
Like,
Oh, couple things I want to say about that. So number
mhm.
one, so when Jeff, the cameraman, is asking her like, "Hey, what are you doing after? You want to like go out and get a drink after?" And she just says, "Jeff, fuck you." So good. So funny. And that's what you get. And I'm sorry, but I just think that's what you get from a woman directing that segment. Like it was just perfect. Also the way that the camera is used. So, the last episode that I was on, I think it was Tucker who brought up about that somebody wouldn't walk around carrying a laptop and using that as their camera. Like that was
Mhm.
completely nonsense. You know what I saw the other day on campus? Somebody walking around campus with their laptop
Holding their
open
laptop.
with somebody on the screen. And I was like, that's it. It does happen. I saw it. I witnessed it in real life.
Mhm.
So, an effective way to still document a found footage film.
So
But
what were they doing? Like showing off the campus to
I
like
think that they were
family? Like
like
this is.
doing like a virtual tour or something, or
Mhm.
showing a friend or something. I don't know, but I was like, ha! Somebody
You should
does
have
do that.
run up and been like, "Did you listen to our VHS episode?"
I was like, you just proved me right, and it's 2024, so they're
Mhm.
still doing this.
I'd say take that, Tucker, but we know he doesn't listen to the show. He's like, yeah,
That's
I don't
true.
listen to the show.
Well,
It's
I'll
like,
just
so
bask in my,
fair enough.
my correctness. But I
So,
do think that they pay special attention, for better or for worse, to the camera and how it's
mhm.
used and why it's there. Like they point out several times, like, "Oh, make sure you're recording this,"
Make
and
sure
I
you're
find that very
focusing.
humorous.
Yeah, and like
Yes.
just taking the time to like let me make sure you're in focus, like act like how an actual news team would do it. And I do like the slice of life, like the people that they interview, like you have like the burnout teens, you have like the weird local dudes that just like are super uncomfortable being on television, but you know that like they probably had their whole like every family member gathered around. Like I remember at some point like my cousin was struck by lightning twice.
What?
Um, yeah. So she was on Good Morning America, and like my aunt would just call like every relative, like your cousin's going to be on Good Morning America. I'm like, why? Like, because she was struck by lightning twice. I'm like, that's crazy.
Does she have
Like,
superpowers?
is she okay?
Oh, I like. Okay,
like,
I like how my first thing is superpowers, and you're like, "Is she
yeah,
okay?"
just, just like, is she a vegetable? Like, no, she's fine. Um, so she's good, but like it was like every calling like every relative because this so and so is going to be on like the local television news. Like you knew like that's what this guy's like wife or family was going to do because he was going to be on the news for like 10 seconds
Mm-hmm.
and that was going to be the highlight.
Oh yeah,
And then you have like the creepy pastor who ends up being the mastermind behind the whole thing, which is awesome.
yeah. That's aged well. I mean, it's
Oh
only a
yeah,
few years old, but accurate.
still going on. I
Still,
mean,
yeah, still true.
oh, the story is old as time itself. Um, so Okano talked about like Rec being a big influence on this short, like what she wanted to accomplish with it, and that makes sense. Like obviously, the news crew kind of like touring through. Um, I mentioned WNUF. She also mentioned like a documentary from 2000 called Dark Days, directed by Mark Singer, where he followed around with his camera crew like a bunch of homeless persons that lived in like I think like the Holland Tunnel in New York City. And it basically and I think it like played Sundance and won a bunch of awards and it kind of the same idea like I'm going to tell their story and I'm going to help these people, but really what you're doing is you're just like, this looks like an interesting subject for a movie, and I am going to kind of exploit them for my own gains.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Get your
Yeah.
Pulitzer, right?
Yeah. Um, I also got huge howling vibes at the end of this, like when they're in the studio, like that scene with like when Dee Wallace transforms, like when she is gets a great effect when she's spitting the black acid on the newscaster and he's ripping his face off, and she's just totally brainwashed and part of the cult at that point, and it's great. And she's just like substituting Ratma in for every other word. But again, like, you know, little kind of tip of the cap to Joe Dante in the end of The Howling, which is one of my favorites.
Yes, agreed. Perfect. And like fun and effective and gross, and yeah, I loved every minute of it.
Would you want to see, because I know like two movies so far, like Siren and then the alien abduction one, have been spun off. Like, I would love to see more Ratma. Like, I would love to see a little feature, a 90-minute feature of like exploring the mythos of Ratma. Like, I think there's
You
more
would?
here to explore. Yeah.
No, I don't want to see. That's why some of these work so well, because they are just so self-contained and short, and
Hmm.
you don't have to dig into it. Sometimes when you dig into it, suddenly you realize, like, oh shoot, there's not a lot there, and
Okay.
that's when things start to fall apart. Like, I actually think it's more effect, less is more, and yeah, it would have to be a pretty well thought out. It's not that, no offense, Ratma. Like, I love you. I love how you look. And, I appreciate what you're doing down there. It seems very interesting. I'm just not convinced that's necessarily what you would need to do. Sometimes, the mystery is better, just not knowing.
Did you see Frogman?
I haven't, but
Okay.
I know you love it. I've heard nothing but good
Frogman is
things from you.
amazing. And maybe Frogman is Ratma extended out to a feature, and it really does work because it's a very similar idea in that you have like instead of a giant rat, you have a 4 foot tall frog, and instead of black acid, it has a magic wand. And
Okay.
there is like cult involvement as well. And Frogman is like one of my favorite found footage movies, and it has that like punk spirit to it as well. And a lot, the last act takes place if in the sewers and underground caves as well. So highly recommend you check that out. Check out Frogman and then get back to me and
All right.
see if you think like that idea could work in some way. So,
Yeah. Maybe we
um,
need a Frogman versus Ratma.
oh dear, that so
Would that work?
instead of like, so if in the next like Godzilla versus Kong, if there's like a 10-minute segment, like when Godzilla and Kong are smashing up cities like low to the ground, like at a street level, it's like Ratma and Frogman kind of like duking it out like at their feet, like something small like that. That could
Yeah,
work.
sure. Okay.
All right.
Sounds cute.
Let, let's move on to The Empty Wake from Simon Barrett. I don't have a ton on this one.
I like it because it's simple. And I think that, especially with some of these others that are definitely a little bit more, it's nice to have something that's just simple and self contained, especially when you're thinking about when this was filmed and the fact that this was a COVID production. It makes sense why it would be just
Hmm.
so self contained, just a few actors involved. And I mean, it does feel like an urban legend too, just
Yeah.
this situation that this woman finds herself in. I think it's like it's not anything super special, but I also don't think it has to be. Like we were talking about, it's like these are just little segments, just little stories. It doesn't have to, not everything has to be excessive. And honestly, some of those visuals and the effects, look, that's what makes it worthwhile. Like when
Yes.
we get to the end, like looks pretty cool and pretty creepy, and I didn't necessarily expect it to like show what it did, I guess.
Yeah, and I think maybe it just takes like I have this down as the weakest segment of the bunch, but even then it's still pretty good. Like it's still like would be middle of the pack in some of the other ones. Like it's worlds ahead of anything in viral. And to your point, like it's just like a well told tale, like in a simple story, but it's really well told. It's really well acted and performed. I think maybe it just takes like a few minutes too long to get there. Like this is the longest of the VHS movies. Like it comes in, clocks in at about an hour 43. And I'm like, okay, we probably could have trimmed a few minutes off of this one and a few minutes off the next one. got it to that like 90-minute sweet spot, and then kept this thing humming along a little bit. Because there were definitely a few moments that I'm like, I get it. Like you're in isolated. This is a job I could never do. Like just this situation, like you are going to spend the night overseeing like this empty wake during a thunderstorm, and you're going to be alone with this dead body. I'm like, nope. Like there is no amount of money that, when they're like, yeah, if you call again, like we're going to fire you. It's like, I'll collect. That's great. Fire my ass. I am more than happy to collect unemployment because this is some spooky shit right here.
Yeah, agreed. And yeah, I agree with you too that this one and the next one I think are a little long, and would have been just as effective if they had cut, 2 to 5 minutes out of them, and still would have worked just as well.
Mm-hmm. And I do like, I think one of the strengths of the series is like, I don't know why. I think it's Andrew, but I don't know why this dude is like he is. Like, all we know is that he like jumped off a building. He's super messed up. He's half a face. And we have no idea like why he's like this. There's never any sort of explanation or rationale for it. I do like when I'm watching it, as soon as they show the top part of his head and that one eye and it starts moving around, I'm like, well, that is a really cool effect. But I'm also like, just put a trash bucket over his head. That way he'll have no idea where you are. And then you can kind of wait it out, right? Like if she had just done that, as soon as
Well,
like his eye
yeah.
started moving, I'm like, oh, he's going to spot her. And then it's all over for her. And then I think the implication is like whatever was in the corpse is now in her when you see her go shambling out, which is like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I guess that's what we're doing here.
Yep, that's it. No, and you know what? You don't need much more. You
Works.
just know it.
It
Yeah, it's just like a
works.
little spooky story, and then the legend continues. She hops out the
Mm-hmm.
window, and she's out there somewhere.
Yep. Yeah. And I didn't like, I'm like, what is like, I didn't realize like, oh yeah, there's a tornado going on in here as well. Like, why are we adding this in? Like, it gets a little bit incoherent, but a little bit busy at the end.
Yes,
But
agree. Yeah.
yeah. But Barrett is someone he, was involved in the first two movies, so it's kind of good to see him kind of come back and play in the sandbox again. He seems to really enjoy it, and it's kind of the first one he comes back and does where he's, just like tells a simple story. He's not doing the wraparounds in this one. He just gets to do his own thing, and he's kind of evolving a bit as a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
All right, the subject. We're moving quick tonight, folks, because like it's very, very late where Mike is. So this is going to be one of the like viral, a little one of the shorter ones. It's very Mike is getting texts from his wife like keep it down in there. So I'm trying to
Keep
sleep.
it down. I'm trying to sleep. I want
Yeah,
to hear about Ratma.
no, she's going to hear about Ratma. She would not dare say a bad word about Ratma. Um, what are your thoughts on the subject?
I mean, I think that it is very cool to have it
It's a
in this
lot.
mix. It's a
Mm-hmm.
lot. Oh, it's a lot. And I do think it's too long. I do think it's too long to kind of figure out what it's going off of. And like, there's a moment where you think it's kind of wrapping up, and then oh, wait, we're still going? It keeps going. And it goes on for a while. So I don't necessarily like the pacing of this one. And you have this in your notes too, and I did too. It looks a little too clean. I wish it would been like had been stylized maybe a little bit more. But I do think it's very cool. Like I like this idea of like this cyberpunky neo. He calls them neo humans, and just kind of this next, this advancement of technology and where people are going. I mean, and that makes sense for this time period. It's like the cyber age, like what's happening? Anything's possible, and this is what people are going to do. They're going to integrate technology. It felt very much almost like, oh my gosh, now I'm blanking. Oh, Tetsuo, the Iron
Mm-hmm.
Man, kind of
Okay.
that sort of style of filmmaking. And I think the effects overall look pretty good. Obviously, you can tell that some of it is very CGI, and it kind of ends up feeling like a video game.
Yeah. That was my question for you. Is like, what is it about this series where they keep going back to like first person point of view? Like we saw that with A Ride in the Park, we saw that in Bone Storm, we saw that in like the Wingard short in part 2. So this is like the fourth or fifth time where we're getting like first person point of view in a found footage movie. Oh, 103198 is first person point of view as well. And we don't necessarily get that in anything else. And I know, like with found footage, it's like a person holding the camera. But even with that, like a good found footage movie, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's just first person point of view. This,
Hmm.
like you said, it feels like, I'm playing a Resident Evil video game, or I'm playing like Call of Duty or something, or I'm playing Biohazard would probably be a uh, good, or Bioshock would be a good fit for this one. I don't get the obsession with like first person in this series.
I guess it just takes some of the variables out of the equation because if you're creating it, and especially in this case, it's supposed to be like I don't know the character's name, but like the camera girl, right? Whose half of her head is just a camera. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to show that all the time. You don't have to show it and spend that much time. You can only do a few shots, and then the rest of the time it's just the filmmaker doing it. And the same thing in any other situation. It's just the filmmaker. You don't have to have the actor necessarily. You could just do voiceover things. It just kind of takes out some of those other
Yeah.
things in the equation. Maybe just makes it a little bit easier to actually execute and eliminate some of those other things that would be a lot more work or, could stretch the timeline more than what they have. Could just simply
Mm-hmm.
be this is easier.
Yeah. I think I just would rather have like 10 to 15 minutes, but see more of that and less of because it even feels video gamey to the degree that it's like, oh, now I see that I have like an attachment for my arm. I have found a weapon, and now I'm going to like attach this to my arm, and I've upgraded my character, and now I'm like stronger. Even like the battery in the lower left hand corner, it's like, this is the energy bar on your character, and you can
Oh,
see like every time
100%.
I get hit, like I am losing energy and life. Like it's like, okay, this is just a little bit Super Mario Brothers for my taste.
But I think that was intentional, especially the fact that
Yeah.
this is VHS 94. Like, video games were
Hmm.
really starting to become more popular. So I do think that's all very intentional. Even the last one had, actually, all of them kind of have elements that feel very video game esque.
Hmm.
So I think that's part of referencing this time period is just sort of the increase in popularity of video games and the effect on that culture and
Yeah.
how you see things. So I think it's twofold. One, just how makes sense to actually make the little short, but also reference the period. It
Yeah.
feels fitting.
I wonder too if I'm like picking these nits because I think I do have like really high expectations because it's a Timo short. He had done Safe Haven, which to me is like the high point of the series. Like I
So
still
good.
think it's
Yeah.
to this point like still the best short in the series. Um, did I freeze up again? I think so. Oh, okay. There I am. To me, it's still like the high point of the series overall. He had done the raid, worked on the raid. Um, so I have like such high expectations going in, and then like you had said, like there's just so much going on here. Like it starts off as like a mad scientist short. You're like, okay, well that's pretty fascinating, and then it goes to the point of view of, I think, subject 98 is like with the woman, and then it shifts to like one of the cops, and then it shifts back to the woman, then to the cop, and you're like, there's too much going on. Like there's too many points of view in one short, and it's just a little bit too busy. The stuff
Hmm.
that works really works. Like you get the RoboCop-esque level of violence and the human cyborg. And again, like this is coming probably a few years removed from like the Human Centipede movies, and like mad scientists kind of merge humans with things that should not be. And this does have like shades of like RoboCop in it. It's just like really fucking weird. Like I don't really know another way to describe it. There are some pathos in it, like when she sees her face in the jar, like that's just sad, for lack of a better word, like that loss of humanity that she experiences and seeing what she's been turned into. And there's that whole with the there's something interesting here, and it's a bit regressive. Well, we've been talking about how the series has moved forward a bit. This one feels a bit regressive, and it does feel more in line with the first two entries in that it is, a bunch of men talking about this woman, like whether she deserves to live or not. Does this person still have a soul? And there's that one cop who's like, look, it's really not our place to decide this. Like, her parents have reported her missing. We found her. She's obviously like, if she's not fully alive, there's some spark there. It's our duty to kind of like give her an opportunity to live, and everybody else just wants to attack her, even if she hasn't done anything to them, because they feel like she's an abomination.
Yeah. I feel like they handle it well in a way that it's
Yeah.
not, it's having a conversation with itself, which I appreciate. And I think fits with what they're kind of discussing and talking about. I mean, I didn't expect it to go as hard with the gore. Like, it definitely gets really bloody and gory and gross, like, towards the end. And it's like, oh, it just keeps going. Like, okay, we're not done yet.
Yeah.
So, that's something that I feel like you're always going to get from a Timo, like project. As soon as you think, okay, well, that's got to be it. Nope. It's going to keep going,
Nope.
and it's going to go
That
two
line
steps
is
beyond
crossed.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. And I mean, I think every VHS movie has got to have a segment like that just is going to go super hard. And what,
Yeah.
while it's not perfect, I think that is this segment.
Yeah. And it does feel like a relic too of the early 2000s, where you have like that torture porn phase, like Saw and Hostel and Turistas and Wolf Creek. In that, like at the start of it, you have these two characters that are strapped down and they're completely helpless. Like that to me is like the difference between like torture porn and a slasher. Like in a slasher movie, like you've seen in a Violent Nature, right?
I have, yes.
Okay. So the difference between something like that, like the kill in a Violent Nature, which is like so ridiculous, like when he essentially creates a human pretzel, is like the character at least had an opportunity to try to get away if she wanted to, and chose to just freeze. Where I have a lot harder time when a character is like strapped to a gurney or strapped to a chair and there's literally like nothing they can do to get away. Like, so this felt like a little bit of a relic of that period of horror as well, which I kind of struggle with.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, all right. Shall we move on to Terror from Ryan Prowse?
Yeah, let's do it.
So this is my favorite of the segments. I really dug this one. This dude's interesting. So in like 2018, he does a film called Low Life, which I don't know if you've seen.
No, I'm not really familiar with him, to be honest.
He's an interesting dude. Like Low Life is this kind, not really horror. I think I've woke up and on my wife. It's not really horror. He's kind of compared to early Tarantino in that, like, it's a very non-linear movie. It's almost an anthology movie, and that he had like different writers write the characters. It's the one where there's like a lucha libre wrestler. It's more of like a crime drama. There's all these intersecting stories, and it has that like really early 90s indie drama heist feel to it. and he handles it really well. And it played like a lot of festivals that featured horror movies because it's like hyper violent. It's handled really well. There's a lot of practical effects. It's a lot of fun. It's a little bit silly. So he's like a natural fit for something like this. He does Low Life, he does this segment, and he hasn't done anything since that. And it's
Huh.
really hard to find anything on him, and I can't figure it out. Like there were literally like articles on like Hollywood Examiner, like he's the next Tarantino, or his films are getting compared to that, like, and then he just disappears.
Weird. Maybe, I mean, who knows? Maybe something VHS-y happened to him. Like, are we going to get a VHS in the mail and it'll show what's happened to him?
Maybe he's been eaten by Ratma.
I don't know. That's weird. But, I mean, I hope he's well.
So,
I hope it's by choice.
yeah. So, what are your thoughts on this one? What are your initial thoughts on Terror?
I mean, I think this one almost looks the best. It feels
Mm-hmm.
very authentic to me. Also, I live in Idaho, and let's just say northern Idaho has a reputation for some of its less than desirable segments of the population that feel very similar to this. And so I was like, "Oh, this hits a little close to home because this feels very much like
Mm-hmm.
some of the North Idaho militia people that still exist, and that's disgusting." Also, we had Ruby Ridge here in Idaho, so I
Yep.
felt like that was kind of an influence on here as well. And so I thought that they really did a good job in mirroring a lot of these real life events while not necessarily referencing any of them like we are this group, you know. It was just kind of like a vague sort of similar group to a lot of these other things that really do exist and really did happen. Also, I really love how deeply humorous this segment is. And I feel like like
Mm-hmm.
it's dark. The humor is
Yeah.
dark and very messed up, but also like brilliant.
Yeah. It. So this is the fourth entry, and in each entry, all of them end with like the last segment is always like boys on an adventure. And it just happens to be that in this one, it's like white nationalist Nazi incel boys on an adventure, but it's still like boys on an adventure. And
Mhm.
sometimes you get like, we're going to have a sleepover and aliens show up, or we're going to go out for like trick or treating in a and it's going to be a haunted house and not a party. And in this case, it's like, we're going to blow up a government building with vampire blood, except it's going to go horribly wrong. Like that's your adventure in this one. So I'm really happy that it like continues the tradition in each of the VHS movies to have that dudes just being dudes.
Dudes just being horrible idiot dudes in this case,
Oh
for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And I think it does like a really good job of replicating like the language and the cadence that you would see in like the videos of like it doesn't make a mockery of it, except that it just shows it for what it is, and that's all you need to do to make a mockery of it. Just like by playing it straight, by playing like a lot of those video parts of it straight, you're like, that's pretty much all you need to do to make a mockery of like white nationalism, is just show it for what it is, and that's already stupid enough. You don't have to play that part of it for goofs, but then the parts that they're filming that aren't necessarily for like public consumption, when they're just like filming to film, you're like, these are just a bunch of good old boys that are just like incredibly dumb people.
Oh yeah,
Um,
so done, and
yeah.
that's why I think it's so funny and like it's so well executed. Is because it just goes with it, and then the way that it lets the kind of the story about this guy that we keep seeing getting shot over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a while before the secret of what he is and what they're doing. It takes
Yeah.
a second to play out. And I love that. Like, I think the pacing of
Yeah.
this one, unlike the last one, like the pacing of this one is perfect. I think
Yeah.
it gives you what you need when you need it, and then it just, as soon as all those pieces are in place, just goes all out. And so I have no complaints about this one. Like everything
Yeah.
top to bottom. Yeah, man, there's some good segments in this now that I'm like, well, wait, which one's my
It's
favorite? I don't know, Ratma or Terror? Like, I think those are both really good segments.
Well, I think like Ratma has like the mascot feel to it. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
Ratma is like your mascot of this movie, and it's a great segment. But I think this is like the best done segment, and you have no idea. You're kind of curious as to like how these guys that seem like relatively clueless manage to capture a vampire. Like how? Like of
Good
all the
question.
people, like how do they first stumble on one, and not only stumble upon one but manage to capture it? um, and I think that it's not that VHS is known for its like social commentary, but you get the you get the commentary here with like the cop who's like, yeah, when someone like Clinton is in office, like, well, we'll uphold the law unless we don't like the person whose law it is, and then we're all about bringing down the government at that point. Which I
Hmm.
think is a pretty, not subtle, but a pretty it's a comment that I think still rings true to this day. I made a note. They name check like Waco explicitly, which in '93 there was like the David Koresh and the Branch Davidian compound, like from February to April. There was the standoff with the FBI that went horribly wrong. And that led like directly, like it's not explicitly named here, but in '95, there's like the Oklahoma City bombings. And I just thought like some of the references they made like kind of implied that like the building that they go by has a lot of like of the architecture of that. Where they were going to place the bomb was very similar, but just the line they use, like, oh, there's a daycare. And one of the more horrible features of the Oklahoma City bombings was the fact that, like, in that building, there was a daycare and like a ton of kids were murdered in that bombing as well. So, like, they're kind of implying that there. So, using 94 as a reference point, it's a point in our history when there was a lot of like internal terrorist attacks. And you're talking about like that's when like the militias here felt emboldened to strike back, which is pretty scary. Um,
Oh, totally.
yeah. But probably to me, one of the best uses of like vampire lore in a short movie or any movie in a long time, the idea that like vampires are so poisoned by the sun that their blood will literally explode, is a fantastic idea. And it's hard to believe that someone hasn't thought of that sooner.
Oh, it's brilliant. What they add, it feels fresh, and it's why you didn't expect him to necessarily be a vampire, because they change it and then we see what
Mm-hmm.
happens with the rabbit. So it's kind of like, oh, this is their version of a vampire. Like, that is brilliant. And then the how his teeth operate and how he kills, like everything about it. This is exactly what the genre needs. This is exactly what these creatures need. We've seen these kind of creatures. We've seen a werewolf a million bazillion times. Give me a Ratma. Like, we've seen
Mm-hmm.
zombies, but have we seen a wake zombie? Not well, I mean, I'm sure we have, but interesting, like a different version. And then yeah, here we have a vampire, but unlike
Yeah.
any vampire I've seen before
Yeah.
or seen since. So
Mm-hmm.
very cool what they do with this, and but still
Yeah.
fits the framework. It's still believable. There's still enough hallmarks of classic vampirism. But yeah, the exploding the sunlight, incredible. Chef's kiss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the vampire itself ends up being like a suicide bomber of sorts. Like at the end of the short, like he's like, decides to just basically emulate by like grabbing onto the cross and causing that massive explosion. And everything leading up to that, like the scene where, you know these guys are done in by their own stupidity. They're like, let's get super drunk the night before this massive operation we're supposed to do, and I'm going to dare you to kiss a vampire that you're dancing around with. And it's just like, like bros are always going to be bros at the end of the day. That whole thing plays out great.
Oh yeah, and how they delay the whole mission because the container doesn't fall right. They're like, well, that's it. It's pushing us back a whole day because we have to make sure it looks cool, because that's what it's like. It's not even their mission. They're just it's so funny, and they're like, oh man, we gotta push it back a day. Like, so
and then
funny.
the dude with the gun just like sprays half of them with bullets because he can't wait. It's like he just ends up shooting half the militia down. It's like really well done. Like, to me, it's kind of like one of the more unheralded segments in the whole series. Like, it's one of the top tier ones. Like, it's behind Safe Haven, but it ain't that far behind for me. Like, it might be my second favorite segment in the whole series to boot right now.
I know. We definitely, when we do our rankings, I'm not exactly sure how you're planning on doing that. Like, I think obviously rank the films overall, but we should pick like our top 3 segments, because that would be interesting, because this is a great segment. And I think you're right. Yeah. I don't hear people talking about, probably because it's about a group of Nazis. Like, nobody wants to be like, I love that one. But it's making fun, it's making fun of them.
It's making fun of the Nazis. It's not sympathetic towards the Nazis.
Agree, yes.
It's continuing the long tradition of making fun of the Nazis, which is again, it's a low-hanging fruit, but the best kind of low. Sometimes the low-hanging fruit is the most delicious kind of fruit. So,
agreed.
All right. Well, like I mentioned, it is very late where I am right now. It is about 3 a.m. So we are going to wrap things up in a moment here. So, Rachel, you have 800 podcasts that are going on. You're just starting. I think you're just undertaking The Boys season 4 with Girls on the Boys. But I'm not going to plug your stuff. You go ahead, and what is going on with everything you're working on right now?
Sure. So over on Halloweenies, continuing, we're almost done with Alien. I'm not on the episode, but the boys will be covering Covenant. I'd let them have that one. They can have that one. And also, we will be doing a rental on the Amityville Horror. So very excited about that, because I believe it's turning 45. Yeah, 45th anniversary.
Oh, so the original, okay.
Yes, the original. Of course, Margot Kidder, a queen. And
I love Margot Kidder.
Yeah, I know, me too. And then on Losers Club, we're back in the land of Bill Hodges, and we'll be covering Finders Keepers, my personal favorite of the Hodges trilogy. So, yeah, pretty interesting book, actually, reread. I was like, oh yeah, there's actually a surprising amount here for a Hodges book. So yeah, if you're a fan of that, or maybe not, maybe tune in, and maybe we'll convince you how brilliant... Okay, I'm overselling this, but yeah, we're covering Finders Keepers on Losers Club coming up soon.
And you're starting on season 4 of Girls on the Boys?
Yes, yep, we're going to be dropping episodes on season 4, which has been a very divisive season. So I'm excited to go through it, because universally, it's usually people have been pretty happy with it. So I'm very curious to see where it's going to go. I have faith in the creators, but yeah, some very interesting things happening on the boys. So can't wait to get into that on the Girls and the Boys.
I need to dive into that show. I've watched a couple episodes. I've watched the first 2, really dug it, and it seems like it's up my alley. And I think I need to sit down. I think the show I'm watching now is Evil, which seems really... I
love Evil too. Yes, I enjoy Evil as well. But yeah, The Boys is your kind of humor. Very dark, very cynical, very self-aware, but also very well done. That's the special, the part that matters the most. Well executed.
This might be the year I watch more comedy than horror. I've just been on this kick where I'm just watching more. I decided that July was going to be the month I watch as many Eddie Murphy movies as possible, and I think I'm up to since the start of July 12 Eddie Murphy movies in the past 8 days. Just
I
literally
love that for you.
Yeah. Like I wonder if I can get through like everything he's done. Like I did like the first couple. I won't watch Beverly Hills Cop 3 because like I don't want to subject myself to that. But the new one is great. The new, I don't know about great, but the new one's like really fun.
I've heard that.
But I will go to the mat for Daddy Daycare in a way that most people will go to the mat for like a Fellini film, like or a French New Wave film. I'm like, Daddy Daycare is so much fun. And then I watched Dolomite Is My Name and like a bunch of the other 80s output. So I'm starting to get to some of the more kid-friendly fare, which I'm not super looking forward to, but you know, some of it'll be all right. But be the
Yeah,
summer of Eddie Murphy.
have fun with Doctor Doolittle and was it Norbit?
There was a Norbit, which I think cost him the. I think it's either Pluto Nash or Norbit that might have cost him the Oscar because people were so like the voters were so offended of like about Pluto Nash, like he made something that bad that they couldn't vote for him for I think it was Dreamgirls, or like, no, he can't possibly. It's kind of like Adam Sandler not getting nominated for Uncut Gems, or like we cannot give the guy who made just pick it, Little Nicky, he cannot be nominated for an Oscar. We can't do that. So, so listeners, you know me, you know this show. I think later this week I've got an upcoming appearance, or we're recording an episode for the Moving Pictures Film Club. Rebecca and I, we're going to be talking about Texas Chainsaw Massacre because we finally have settled on a sort of launch date for our other show, Off the Hook, which is going to be like a minute-by-minute breakdown of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We've recorded about 10 episodes so far, and we're going to start putting those out and recording on a regular basis. So you are going to know. I thought like doing 4 hours and change on that movie was a lot, and we've already recorded about 10 or 11 hours on about 10 minutes of the movie. So yeah, it's a lot, folks. But Rebecca is a genius. I can't keep up with her as much as I would like to. So we're going to be appearing on Moving Pictures Film Club pretty soon. Like I think by the time this drops, it should be relatively soon after that. So I'm really excited to talk about that. So be on the lookout for that show soon. We'll put like snippets of it on here. We have our official announcement when it comes out in August. I think we're going to timing it for the release of like when that movie dropped 50 years ago. In the meantime, please rate, review, and subscribe to us wherever you're getting your podcasts. Make sure that you are becoming a patron by going to patreon.com/pod and the pendulum, where we have a lot of our bonus material. Devon and I just did In a Violent Nature, which is a lot of fun. We argued about the end of that movie, which I said was brilliant. He said was not. I am right. He's not here to tell me I'm wrong, so I'll say it again. I am right. I'm not sure what we're going to do this month, but we'll pick something fun. Maybe we'll do Long Legs. I don't know. It's a space we get to cover some like non-franchise stuff. I usually blab on a bit more here at the end, but again, it's super late, so we'll be back next week with VHS 99. I think that one is a first-time watch for me, so I am looking forward to setting down and checking that out. And take care, everyone. Have a great week.